I don't want to rustle paper when I'm.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. This is Jenny Burdett with the Robert Group. Just wanted to say thank you so much for spending your evening with us. This should be an interesting hour. I have on the other line in just a moment David Somers, Tim Freemax, and I believe Michelle Mowry with the City of Los Angeles. And just to go over a couple of ground rules for this evening. Number one, the chat function has been turned off. So if you have questions, we're encouraging you to, let me change my pens here, use your bars and type in your questions. We do have the Spanish translation, Alex Barella, available tonight. So if there's any questions, just go ahead and type them in there. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to begin his presentation.
Hi, thanks for taking the time out and for joining us tonight's webinar presentation. This is David Somers. I'm the bicycle planner from the Department of City Planning. Also with me is Michelle Mowry, Senior Bicycle Coordinator from LADOT, and Tim Fremeau, Bicycle Program Engineer. There's something really different happening in the city. Famous for its traffic congestion, Angelenos are starting to look at their streets and see new opportunity. This is Ciclovia, an event where several times a year different major arterials are closed to motor vehicles on a Sunday so that people can experience the way their city feels without cars. Underlying this is an increasing will to seek other ways of getting around the city, in a large part by bicycling. For the last decade, a movement has swept cities across the country urging a re-examination of user priorities on our roadways. From at least the mid-20th century, principles of traffic engineering has demarcated major roads for a singular purpose, to get traffic moving when it is most congested. Though often this has resulted in roads designed at the exclusion of the user experience at the neighborhood level. A transportation paradigm known as complete streets is an evolving notion that streets are urban spaces that need to balance the needs of a broader range of urban users and purposes, considering the safety and comfort for the people that take transit, walk, and bike, in addition to the needs to move traffic. Our city has over 3,000 miles of commercial arterials within its boundaries. With the Great Streets Initiative, our mayor is challenging us to reassess the city's most undervalued real estate asset. But for what purpose is it to be designed for? In this diagram, you can see complete street elements integrated into a standard arterial to improve the user experience. Curb medians are introduced to provide some scenic green and pedestrian refuge. Parked cars and bicycle lane placement is inverted to increase comfort of bicyclists. Outboard transit shelters provide direct loading access to buses without the need to pull in and out of the curb. Here's a photographic rendering of how complete streets principles can be applied. You can see pedestrian bulb outs, new street trees, bicycle lane and bus only lanes while maintaining several travel lanes. This is New York City. Though we note that a diversity of cities are adopting complete streets planning framework that also include Chicago, Austin, Memphis, Atlanta, and our neighbor to the south of us in Long Beach. So as demonstrated by Ciclovia, Angelenos are showing increased interest in active transportation. Beyond just these events, bicycling as a travel mode is on the rise in the city, growing by 41% in 1 year alone in 2007. Reasons for this include a range of factors such as interest in health and fitness benefits, addressing environmental concerns by engaging in a low-impact travel option. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions by sector, contributing to 38% of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. Changing demographics contributes where transit and bicycle riding as a way of getting around is growing amongst 30 and under, while driving is declining. We also have been more successful at growing the bicycle infrastructure to support this, and we can't leave out that it can be an enjoyable experience. However, we do hear often, and for all these reasons, more people would engage in bicycling, but they do not think it is a meaningful option if they don't feel safe and that they're not connected to their destinations by some form of bicycle facility that protects them from the fast-moving automobiles. Looking at the data, it is evident why this is. Can we go to the back slide, please? Back slide. Thank you. Looking at the data, it is evident why this is, and also why it has taken major street closures to demonstrate the general interest to travel by bicycle. Bicycling continues to bear a disproportionate amount of traffic-related injuries and fatalities relative to driving. In 2001, bicyclists in the United States had 12 times more fatalities than drivers per mile traveled. Research on road safety had demonstrated that bicycle lanes perform well in reducing collisions and improving safety for all road users. Research also supports the notion that roads are safer with more bicycles riding on the roadway rather than less. You can see certain hotspots develop on the map, which supports the need for better facilities in these locations. And here Michelle Mowry will give a bit more on bicycle safety.
I just wanted to mention that unfortunately nearly half of all bicycle collisions are due to poor riding habits by bicyclists. Safety education for motorists and bicyclists is a key element of the bicycle plan, and we're working with our partners with LAPD, LAUSD, the LA Bike Coalition, as well as Cycle and Metro to work on education efforts to educate, again, motorists and bicyclists.
Next slide, please, Jenny. Creating healthy options is another underlying need addressed through planning for complete streets. This map shows the prevalence of child obesity by community. Some in the public health fields have taken note on the role our infrastructure plays in reinforcing sedentary lifestyle patterns. We can look at these patterns to better define optimal outcomes for where we can encourage more travel choices. Creating greater access is another goal the city aims for in building our bicycle network. This figure demonstrates that a large number of households in the reddish-orange areas are getting by with a maximum of one car, and in some cases, no car. You can see a pattern emerge where there's better access to transit and around universities and also major employment centers. Contributes to low car ownership. Bicycle facilities complements transit by bringing access to stations and bus stops within reach of a greater number of people. Next slide. Another side of accessibility is creating choices for people with short commute distances. About 40% of all trips in the county are 3 miles or less, and we are seeing bicycle become a more attractive option where people live closer to their jobs. Note the jobs housing rich areas in the South Valley, just east of downtown Hollywood in West Los Angeles. Next slide. So based on a lot of the discussion of safety, access, and health goals, the city adopted the 2010 bicycle plan. A big piece of the plan involved creating these distinct types of bicycle networks. The backbone network shown in violet is along major arterials and are intended to help bicyclists access major destinations while increasing safety. The neighborhood network shown in orange can help facilitate low-stress, local neighborhood trips. Many of these streets today serve vital connections and can be improved, especially where the roads cross major arterials. The green network are off-street bicycle paths, which also offer important regional low-stress bicycle options. Next slide, please. It's important to talk about the bicycle plan as just one component of the city's transportation element, which, by the way, is currently being updated and is now called the Mobility Plan 2035. With the Mobility Plan, the city is introducing the transit and vehicle networks, which will focus investment on making those modal improvements along distinct corridors. The bicycle plan is just one component to a complete streets transportation system. Next slide, please. At the time the city began the plan, we did not have a connected network, which was often a complaint as to why we are not seeing more people bicycling in as an option. You can also see a pattern here where bicycle lanes were placed at the city's periphery. Striping lanes were largely a function of opportunity, where the street was wide enough to accommodate them rather than functionality. And you can see to the next slide, with the data-driven effort of the 2010 bicycle plan completely changed this framework. You could see where the LADOT was active striping bicycle lanes, beginning to fill in the bicycle network. If you overlaid these with the other maps, you could see the priority in the implementation process respond to high-value network additions that begin to address the core needs of access and safety. Next slide, please. And so this is Colorado Boulevard, where we started. This is where we really started with implementation after the plan was adopted. You could see in the figure above, it had 3 lanes in each direction. Some thought this configuration showed above was primarily serving commuters between Glendale and Pasadena with little benefit to local neighborhoods and businesses. This project involved 1 travel lane removed in each direction to install wider buffered bicycle lanes, as you can see in the after photograph. We assessed the proposed changes to both traffic and safety and held a public hearing. Back slide, please. We assessed the proposed changes to both traffic and safety and held a public hearing in addition to presenting several community meetings in the area. Note the 2 photos are offset, so the median was indeed retained. It was designated on the backbone network in the bicycle plan, but it is through the persistent support of a neighborhood council and other civic groups that we began implementation here. Demonstrating that it is not all about bicycle lanes on arterials, we have also begun implementation of the neighborhood network. Here, LADOT simply modified existing traffic diverters that prevented through car movement of a local street to encourage bicyclists to use the street. Next slide. Some cities have begun to test the degree that the new infrastructure is performing to measurable objectives, and the city is also involving this as a key part of the implementation process, especially where installing bicycle lanes will require trade-offs with the repurposing of a travel lane. With each corridor we select to move forward with, we will work with community to establish clear goals and benchmarks, such as reduce collisions by 30%. We will design the facility to meet the objectives and measure performance afterward to report back on progress. Key metrics include monitoring collisions, volume, ridership, travel times, and speed, and user satisfaction. Over the long term, we can also consider environmental and public health metrics and indicators. Where bicycle lane projects involve road diets have led some in those communities to raise concerns about access to businesses. New York has included monitoring sales tax data into their sets of metrics. Preliminary results show that bicycle lanes, when paired with road diets, have not hampered economic performance, and some corridors experience higher business volume after project implementation relative to area-wide statistics. These trends may validate notions that lane network increases access to destinations to a broader set of customers to those businesses. In the next slide, we'll hear from Michelle.
So I'm going to just talk briefly about bicycle-friendly business districts, which are cooperative projects between LADOT and local businesses with the purpose of connecting businesses to bicyclists and to encourage local spending. We do this by providing additional bicycle parking incentives and to make bicycling and bicyclists an attractive pool of consumers for the local businesses. Next. Next slide, please. I also want to briefly touch on Bicycle Share. For those of you who know, Bicycle Share is essentially a membership program of loaner bikes that can be used for short trips and primarily to solve that last mile connection, first mile, last mile connection with transit. LADOT and the city is partnering with the mayor's leadership, partnering with Metro to develop a regional program. We're looking at a pilot that will be developed at a number of areas in downtown LA, Pasadena, Santa Monica, with some stations as well in Venice. We look to roll that out sometime mid-next year.
An important point just to underscore the bike share systems here is that bike share systems really only work with the support of the infrastructure.
So Tim Framo here. I just wanted to talk briefly about the cycle track. The next generation of bicycle infrastructure, borrowing from Northern Europe, is the cycle track. It builds off the successes there in attracting a broader range of people into cycling for utilitarian trips. If you could go back to the previous slide. Lane protected from, basically what you have is a lane protected from adjacent travel lanes by parking and bus platforms. They're typically safer than standard bicycle lanes. They attract more riders, more women, children, and seniors. And our first funded cycle track will be on Figueroa. It's called the My Figueroa project. We do hope that the bicycle lanes that we implement are the first step in ultimately upgrading to the cycle tracks in certain key locations.
And so building off that, as I described earlier with the mobility plan, sets a greater vision of a greater low-stress bicycle network that comprised of a combination of cycle tracks, neighborhood streets, and bicycle paths. And so this is a vision that would be that could be implemented up until 2035. We go to the next slide. So the implementation process works like this. Every year, LADOT and planning work to identify corridors that have high potential to satisfy the access and safety and network objectives. This year, we were looking at all the corridors highlighted in red. And if you look at, we have most of the representative areas of the geography of the city covered. And we can go on to the next slide, and you can drill down and actually see the streets listed here. So with Boyle Heights, we have Boyle Avenue and Soto, and you could see the mileage count on the right side, and then where the limits of those corridors that we're evaluating from the first cross street to the second cross street. So in Koreatown and Hollywood, we're looking at completing the Virgil Avenue corridor that was began last year with a segment that went between Melrose and Santa Monica. We'll be looking at continuing that up to Hillhurst. We're also looking at the Sunset and Hollywood corridor as it goes all the way through Hollywood. And also we'll be evaluating Vine Street. In the mid-city, we'll go on to, we looked at 6th Street in San Vicente. Further to the east, just west of downtown, we're also looking at Hoover Street. In South LA, we're looking at Central Avenue is a major corridor, 6.7 miles there, and key sections of Vermont Avenue in the south side near Watts. In the valley, we're looking at Parthenia Street and Woodman, and completing the bicycle lanes on Woodman Avenue. On the west side, we're exploring, evaluating opportunities for Westwood Boulevard in Westwood Village. Also looking at Barrington and McLaughlin and Culver. And in Wilmington, we'll be looking at Anaheim Street. And so for the next slide, please. So you're at the beginning stage of a multi-phased outreach process. The next stage is that we will work with roundtable of diverse stakeholders in each corridor with the participation of neighborhood council and council offices and other organizations. Through the roundtables, we will establish the goals and objectives for these streets, and through that identify the bicycle facilities to meet them. We will then evaluate some of the key metrics before moving forward, such as traffic and safety. We will then reconvene, and based on these goals and objectives and analysis, take direction on what to move forward with. We will then also have public hearings available in the corridor areas with a traffic and safety assessment available beforehand. This will prepare for the final stage of final design and implementation. And also a part of the ability of moving forward is determining if the project is covered under the scope of available funding sources. And so go on to the next slide, please. And so this slide here is just to tie it into the mayor's first executive directed is the Great Streets Initiative, where the quote here, we are taking another big step forward towards fundamental change and how we perceive, interact, and build around us. A great neighborhood needs a great street as its backbone, and we did make the bold changes necessary to build great streets. And finally, the last slide. So there's several ways to get involved and to stay involved in the process. We're going to be talking to neighborhood councils. We're going to be talking to your council members, and so it's important to give your feedback early on as we begin the process on what is your aspirations for the corridor, what are your goals, and how do they fit within the bicycle plan, or what are the options that we should look at as far as moving forward. You can also send the direct feedback to me. My email contact is on the slide here, david.summers@lacity.org. You can also check back on project updates, and at the labikeplan.org is the project's website. And also, we may be giving some communication as well with the LA DOT bike blog. So with that, I've really concluded the formal aspect of the presentation, and then at this point we could just go on to questions and try to answer some of these that you've provided here. So, okay, so the first question. Skateboard. What are we doing to accommodate skateboard and longboard commuters in a complete streets plan? We shouldn't be on sidewalks, but bikers can be hostile to us as well.
Unfortunately, this is not accommodated within the bicycle plan. We've been focusing on bicyclists primarily. This is something we should probably be looking at as a city more, and how we accommodate skateboarders on the roadways. I believe the California Vehicle Code does define a skateboarder as a pedestrian, which may make things difficult as well. So it's not something we're addressing right now. We're looking primarily at the implementation of the bicycle plan. We can get back to you if you want to reach out to us via one of those options that David provided earlier.
So the next question, when do we get those sexy protected bike lanes like New York City and Long Beach, and not the unsafe versions we have all over the city that have bike guarding parked cars rather than having parked cars guarding bikes in the San Fernando Valley? And I think Michelle will take this one.
So what we're talking about, what we're talking with on cycle tracks are those sexy protected bike lanes. They're known as cycle tracks in Europe. It looks like California is moving towards calling them cycle tracks and defining them. California, through a bill that's currently circulating through the House, the legislature right now, is looking to implement a design process for this, and we're moving forward with our first with the MyFig project.
And I just want to add, we would love to do more cycle tracks. The challenge really is we want to do them right, and it's not as simple as simply flipping the positioning of the bike lane with the parked car. In order to do it right, we want to signalize it. We want to provide the bus boarding and a lighting, and to do that, we need funding to do so. So, we want to do more, but Figueroa, the MyFig project, is the first opportunity we have with the funding to actually implement the cycle track. The next question is Van Nuys Boulevard going to get a cycle track? We need one. Van Nuys is not part of this 40-mile group. However, it is part of Metro's fund. I think it's partially funded, at least through Measure R, if not fully funded, to do some sort of transit, enhanced transit corridor. Though I believe they haven't yet determined what form that will be. It may be some sort of tram, light rail, or bus. With that, we are working with Metro on solutions to accommodating bicyclists through the corridor. We're not certain what form that will take.
And we need you to tell Metro and your elected officials that you need a cycle track in that facility. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of public support to get a cycle track in there.
In addition to that, we're also in the comment period of the mobility plan. So if a cycle track, a low-stress bicycle facility or a cycle track is supported for Van Nuys, you could see that on the draft mobility plan low-stress bicycle network map. And if that's something that's supported, then certainly let your council office know, and you can also write back to the city planning department. My colleague, MyLaw, which is my.la@lacity.org, for the mobility plan process. And so the next question is, Panorama City is a very transit and bike-dependent community, and people are so intimidated by automotive traffic that most cyclists ride on the sidewalk.
So if most cyclists are riding on the sidewalk, it's a pretty clear indication that we need facilities like cycle tracks. Again, we're at the very beginning of this process. We hope to implement more throughout the city, but we need funding, and we need you to tell your elected officials that these are the sorts of facilities we need.
So what is planned on Westwood Boulevard for the second year? That's a great question. Well, I'll tell you this much. That's really going to be determined largely by the outreach that we conduct and as part of the roundtable discussions. So we really like to have public involvement in really defining what the facility types are appropriate for these corridors, and that should be really driven by the various objectives that are set that the bicycle plan speaks to as far as safety, connectivity, access to major destinations, and given that UCLA campus is probably going to be part of the discussion, but we'll see how that discussion unfolds, and if you would like to participate, just let us know. And back to the Valley, where there's also more preference for Van Nuys. It's nice that we're considering Woodman and Parthenia, and Van Nuys is important. So again, just getting back to the coordination that we'll be having with Metro, and of course, your voice is very important in that discussion. Let's see. I see that Metrolink track bike path through the Valley is still showing, but when a Metrolink rep was talking about adding a second track along much of the section, I asked about the bike path, and he said that this would no longer be an option. Is there a plan to find an alternative low-stress path through the North Valley, cycle track on Devonshire, Nordop?
I'm not sure which corridor is being referenced here. There is the San Fernando Road corridor where there are plans for a second rail track. Our bike path is being built. There's actually a section almost completed, and it's with that future track in mind. So we are maintaining clearance from that future track up there, and we do have funding to extend that path all the way to City of Burbank. There is another corridor which you may be referring to that kind of goes east-west. That's the Simi Valley corridor. And we have not yet really explored it. That part is not funded at all, so it would be premature to make any assessment at that point.
In the San Fernando Valley, there are only 2 Metro Red Line stations, one in NoHo and Universal City. Both experience heavy usage and would be a perfect place for a bike share. Unfortunately, there is no bike infrastructure on a place for the one street that services them both, Lancashire Boulevard. Why is that, and what can be done to remedy this?
So Lancashire Boulevard was part of our year 1 evaluation package, 40 miles. It's still part of the discussion that we're having. We've been working with CD2, Council District 2. There have been a number of community meetings. As far as I understand, there has not been an official determination on Lancashire, but we are working with them on that particular region in terms of connectivity with the north-south corridors. CD4 as well.
Do you plan on extending the study corridor parameters to connect larger cultural sites like the Watts Towers? Are there going to be bike stations included into the infrastructure like canopies and seating areas?
So I don't even know where to start with this. Our goal is to implement the bike plan. So we certainly want to serve attractors like Watts, like the Watts Towers and others. As we are able to build out the network, we're going to be looking at doing additional amenities. Like you mentioned, we are actually talking about doing bike stations now. We've got a mobility hub project that's funded with some federal funds, and we'll be looking at implementing those as well with our partners in planning.
And so this one refers back to the bicycle lane projects that we evaluated in part of the first year evaluation package. I'm thinking of Venice Boulevard into downtown. But there are also others that have not yet been implemented.
Of the first year package, we have implemented approximately, I believe, 6 corridors. And Venice Boulevard is one that is currently still in the stages of design. There are still some remaining corridors which we're still working with the elected officials and elected offices on more outreach. But there are still many corridors that are still in development. So just because they haven't been installed yet, they're still coming.
Okay, this one, is there any interest to work with LA Tourism in their Car-Free LA program, encouraging Angelinos and visitors to explore the city's neighborhoods without a car, instead via foot, bike, or metro?
We are continuing to work with LA Tourism and have actually reached out to them through the Bike Friendly Business Program. We haven't done a lot with them yet, but it's on our radar.
Says, this is a great list. When will input be gathered for year 3 projects? And you know, this is really an ongoing process. I think we got to make some headway in year 2 really before we end up we can really get into year 3. But we still have the bicycle plan implementation team. They are very. It's a team that it's a group of people. It's generally open to the public. Anybody can participate, and that's one of the forums by which we select the priority corridors that we choose to evaluate. So stay tuned to that process, and you can get updates on the LADOT bike blog. Are any of the year 2 projects considering cycle tracks? You know, the answer to this is really going to be, again, defined as to what happens in the roundtable discussions, and also funding. You know, we are relying on Measure R, but we have to, you know, some of these projects, actually, some of these are coming from the Highway Safety Improvement Program, and so there is, but that I don't think would cover the cost fully of a cycle track. But again, there's also other coordination that's happening right now. Some of these corridors are also part of the Mayor's Great Streets Initiative, and to the extent that some of those conversations may happen or support cycle tracks, that, you know, there could be several options on the table.
So we all would like to get a lot of cycle tracks throughout the city. Our starting place is to get bicycle lanes on the ground, buffered bicycle lanes if we can. That will help us colonize that space, and as we have funding and support to put in more upgraded facilities, we'll move those into cycle tracks. It is in our long-range vision.
Is there any component in the bike plan to increase enforcement to keep bike lanes free of cars and/or keep bike lanes free of debris or trash?
The bike plan has several policies around maintenance, talks about sweeping and things like that. There are 183 policies in the bicycle plan, and again, another section is maintenance, another section is enforcement, and we're working with our partners on LAPD on that.
And does the mobility plan address recreational mountain biking in LA city parks such as Griffith Park?
There is a small section of the mobility plan that touches on this, but it essentially draws in, I believe it's in the addendum, but it draws in on the policies that are already in the bicycle plan.
You mentioned that having bike lanes increases businesses based on New York City. What about here locally? And this is a really good question. You know, we're just we're looking into this. You know, we don't want to make any forecasts, but we want to apply the same methodology. You know, if we're going to be removing a travel lane and putting in a bicycle lane, we're going to be looking at retail sales data for select corridors, business corridors. We have right now we have a grant with SCAG that we're initiating that are going to be looking at corridors for where we've implemented bicycle lanes or road diets. Colorado Boulevard, we'll be looking at 7th Street. So we are going to be looking internally at LA data to demonstrate that we're you know, relying on local data.
I also wanted to note that after York went in, we did do a study on the sales tax and found out that there was no hit in the sales tax. There was not a decrease in the sales tax, and there's since been another study that shows an increase in business in that corridor. We're going to continue to gather this data, but we need support, help, and funding to do this. We're running on a really limited budget.
Next question. Have you considered cycle tracks that are not one-way placed on both sides of the street, but a single two-way cycle track? So I think what the question is that placing a single two-way cycle track on one side of the street.
We have considered that design. There are a number of reasons why it may be not preferable to the one-way. One item is turning movements for bicyclists out of the cycle track. The other is that it doesn't necessarily gain us the width to restore more lanes of traffic. So it's something we do typically consider, but at this point we have yet to find a good candidate for that.
And cycle track design is going to be driven by each particular corridor that you're trying to solve. So I think we'll look at the best design for the corridor as we address each of them.
And then what can neighborhood councils do to expedite bike lane implementation? Are there ready-to-go data packets we can use? We're actually going to be evolving as part of our outreach process and implementation process, the traffic and safety assessments. We're also going to be looking at some of the key metrics that we're going to be relying on going forward. So we're likely not going to have the data and reports available until at least after the first roundtable discussion. But we are going to have to go through the hearing process and all the way through the outreach and hearing process before we're able to actually install the lanes.
So the next question is, I see more bikers in San Pedro since the new bike lanes have gone in, yet I still see people riding on the sidewalks and there is a bike lane when the bike lane is present. What's up with that? How do we get people to use the lanes? This is a really clear indication of a need for cycle tracks, that people do not feel comfortable riding on the roadway with cars, even if they have space. So while we get more bicycle lanes in and more people ride in the bicycle lanes, there's still going to be people that are uncomfortable, and we need to provide cycle tracks for those in the future.
Are you looking at targeting transit hubs as business bicycle areas, as these areas are the point of the last mile?
At this juncture, we're looking primarily at business improvement districts for our bicycle-friendly business program, although we are working with Metro, as I mentioned, on the bike share program, and that's going to point to some of the transit hubs and be driven on the transit network. So I think we'll see these opportunities grow in the future.
And what is the status regarding selection of Vineland versus Lancashire in North Hollywood? There has been no communication on this issue for some time.
I would urge you to contact Council District 2, as my understanding is there's been no official determination made at this time.
There is some work being done in the south end of the valley along the LA River. Where will that work begin and terminate? When will the work be done?
South end of the valley or west end of the valley? So in the west end of the valley, there is a project that's being constructed by the Bureau of Engineering. This was a bridge project where we were able to get some bikeways in. That's still in construction. If you see that, please don't ride there, and additional signs are going to be going up on that. And I'm hoping I've answered this question correctly. Yeah.
Will the staff report be ready for the first roundtable? No. The first roundtable is actually going to help us define, some of our objectives and what the metrics we should even be looking at. We know that we're going to be looking at travel volume. We know we're also going to be looking at safety statistics. So we are not going to have a staff report until at a minimum until after the first roundtable, but likely the second. So we'll definitely have the staff report available before the public hearing. What will be in the staff report, as I said, so what will be in this traffic and safety? Are people studying sales tax during cyclovia events? There's have been some preliminary work on this. I think UCLA have conducted a qualitative study I think that was during the first Wilshire.
And I believe the results were that they found a 10% increase in sales tax revenue.
So is LADOT working with South Pasadena to close the small gap on York Boulevard? The new lane is nice, but there's a short gap.
So we did work with the City of South Pasadena, and we had to present to their Public Works Commission. We presented a couple of times, and in fact, our alumnus, John Fisher, actually pushed really hard for us to close that gap. He wanted to do a more aggressive road dye than we were even presenting. However, some of the fellow commissioners were concerned about traffic delay because they would have to reduce their lanes westbound in the city limits of South Pasadena, and they basically voted to not support. So we had no choice but to cut off the improvements at the city boundary.
And can Prop O funding be used for cycle tracks if bioswales are incorporated as buffers between bikes and cars? So Prop O leveraging as part of bicycle
I'm not familiar enough with the Prop O legislation to know if it's eligible. You should know that cycle tracks are vastly expensive, though. They're in the multi-million-dollar projects, depending on the right-of-way needed and the length of the project.
Are you able to ask local designaries and artists to create some of these bike stations and cycle tracks? Bike stations and cycle tracks, if they can design them. It would be nice for every neighborhood to have a distinctive feel to each location of these structures.
So as a transportation facility that needs to function as a roadway, cycle tracks are probably not as much of an option, but bike stations absolutely should have public art options and should have a public artist and a designer involved from the get-go. That said, we can also look at streetscape projects that follow the cycle tracks.
Where can we get more information on the Mayor's Great Streets Initiative? We know the streets, but I'd love to know more. Is there a project website? Gee, I wish the Mayor's office was here. You know, I'm not exactly sure if there is a project website. I don't think there's a project website so far for Great Streets Initiative. So, but check the Mayor's office website. They do have a blog. They also have like the media tab just to see if there's any updates. I am confident that they will give any updates as they move forward.
So the next question is, can you say something more about bike corrals or any more going in? We have a waiting list of about 30 right now. We've got 3 are in pending design at this moment. I'm trying to remember where the next one is. It's not going, off the top of my head, it's not going to come to me. The one after that is in CD2 on Lancashire near the Lemley Theater, and we are working on one with the former Handsome Coffee Roasters, which is actually just changed ownerships, and they're doing a new application now. So yes, we're working through them. We actually expect to finish getting the 10 in this year.
So do you really think that with all the drivers looking for parking and rubbernecking, putting a bike lane on Hollywood Boulevard is a good idea?
You know, that's part of the evaluation process. We're going to be determining what the impacts are, and with all of these projects, it's going to be evaluating benefit versus cost in terms of traffic delay versus safety benefit and benefits to multimodal transportation. And actually, parking is always on the table in terms of, you know, in terms of sacrificing something versus another. Parking could be sacrificed on Hollywood versus a lane. That's something we could consider in the future. So there are many options. This is really the beginning of that process, and you know, we'll have to determine that as we move forward.
And how do you design cycle tracks safely around driveways and alleyways where the sight lines are poor? Seems moving the bikes closer to the private property line will reduce sight lines even more. So is there a visibility problem?
Essentially, what we were trying to do, especially with the Figueroa project, is we are certainly sensitive to the issue of visibility. That's one of the reasons we want to protect it, especially at signalized intersections. At locations like minor streets, which are not signalized, and driveways, we're going to be using a combination of pavement markings, green infill, as well as potentially some signage, and to basically indicate that those areas are mixing zones, if you will, between vehicles and bicyclists. So we are going to use the tools at our disposal to make those areas very clear.
So the question, are you looking at putting bike lanes on calm residential streets in areas with heavy vehicle traffic on major streets so that streets like Westwood Boulevard can continue to accommodate heavy AM and PM motor traffic? Most commuters will still be unable to use bike lanes due to the spread and geography of LA County.
So as David mentioned, the bike plan covers basically 3 elements. We have the arterial network or the backbone network, we have the green network, which is our path network, and we have our neighborhood network, which is bike-friendly streets. We hope to move forward and implement all of those. There are people who will be able to use the bike-friendly streets and be more comfortable there. There are people that want more direct routes and need the bicycle lanes, and we'll have people that have long-distance commutes that need to use that green network as well.
And the other thing about residential streets is there are typically 2 challenges from a purely engineering standpoint. One is that they're simply not wide enough for bicycle lanes, and 2 is that they often don't have signalized crossings at all the arterials along a corridor. So there, you know, just from the issue of being able to cross those streets and having the room to accommodate a bicycle lane, those are typically very difficult, if not possible, on those residential roadways.
And also just to come back to the fact that the roundtables are going to look at all the options that we have moving forward. So, those are the cost and benefits and costs that we'll be having to look at before we move forward.
So the next question is, will any Year 2 projects be green painted bike lanes? So we're looking for your input as a part of this process, but know that green lanes are expensive. We, at the very least, would like to look at using green as a conflict zones in areas where we have driveways and problems like that. But we haven't closed our mind to the idea of doing more green lanes as we have the funding.
What is the turnaround time for local business to get bike racks once they apply on your website? Are there any holdups or backlog?
So we do currently have a problem with our bike rack installation. It's generally 2 months. When things are going well and all our contractors are lined up, we were able to get a bicycle rack in 2 months. Right now, we are, at first we did not have a contract for bicycle racks. We have now resolved that and have bicycle racks on hand. Unfortunately, our contractor, again, we do not have the city forces to install these racks. We have to do this all on contract, and they're all grant funded. We are now looking for a new contractor to install bicycle racks for us. We have been through a bid process. Unfortunately, the bid was thrown out. We have to start all over again, but we're looking to move forward and to normalize this by the summer.
This is Ginny. I need to interrupt for just a brief
Okay, and a
moment.
question.
Oh, hold
Yeah.
on just a second. I just want to give folks a heads up that it is 7:45. We're going to be taking the last round of questions. We'll be wrapping up at 8 o'clock. So go ahead, David. It's all yours.
Okay, and cities like Amsterdam have cycle-only streets where cars are completely rerouted. Are there any plans for this in areas in Los Angeles, and where might those locations be?
So that's a concept we are exploring, but is not in the bicycle plan at this juncture. We are at this point trying to get a functional network up so we can get people riding, and we'll move on to cycle tracks, but we are certainly would like to see more innovative facilities as we move forward.
So it appears that there's no other questions that we have in our queue here. Well, there is one. Okay, there's a couple. Okay, good. What is the best way to get your street considered for neighborhood bike-friendly streets?
So take a look at the bicycle plan. It's available on our website, bicyclela.org. They're already out there. The issue always is staff and money. If you've got a project, you see the neighborhood network that's in there, and there's a project in your neighborhood you want to explore, start working with your neighborhood council and with your council office to move the project forward and help us identify some funding.
The Chatsworth Neighborhood Council runs an annual free bike rally called The Cult to showcase the new bike lanes on Chatsworth, Canoga Park, Northridge. Is there DOT support for these types of activities to encourage cycling?
So again, we're very limited in staff and funding. We will table certain events. You just need to send us an email. You can send that to me, Michelle, M-I-C-H-E-L-L-E .Mowery, M-O-W-E-R-Y, at lacity.org, and if we're able to, we'll send our student interns out to your event.
And regarding bicycle racks, are any of them large enough to house recumbent bikes or trikes?
Our standard bicycle design that's and it's adopted standard for the city is the inverted U. It looks like a big upside down black staple on the sidewalk. There's generally enough room for a recumbent and or a trike, but, and this is the big but, it depends on the width of the existing sidewalk. So while we put them in to allow for a standard bicycle, if there's enough room on the sidewalk, the rack will support them.
And where are the next few bike lane projects expected to be striped, this spring or summer?
You know, I can't recall off memory what's on our list. I could tell you a few, but basically, we are still we have a few what we call low-hanging fruit. There are still a number of streets where we can install bicycle lanes with either no vehicular lane loss or there are very low volume streets where we can do road diets. There are still a few of those. We're running really low. We're getting to the point now where eventually all that will remain will be these streets that we are going through this process with the public on. So Within the next few months, there'll be some lanes going in, but I can't tell you exactly which ones off the top of my head.
So the next question, what are Westwood alternatives? And again, this is going to be largely driven by the roundtable discussions where we establish what the objectives and the goals that we're going to set out to do, and to what degree that a bicycle facility, either a main arterial or on neighborhood streets, will serve to achieve those goals and objectives. So, we are trying to implement the plan. We have an open and flexible process. It's dependent absolutely on public engagement, and it's also largely driven by data. Would an adjacent north-south street be safer for cyclists than Westwood Boulevard in the village? If Westwood Boulevard has auto lanes removed, will Metro reroute cars and more importantly buses that clog rush hour traffic? That's kind of hard to speculate on. I don't know. This is something that we're going to be looking at as the project definition evolves. I don't really believe that that's going to be necessary option, even if a bicycle lane were to be proceeded with. But we're going to have to evaluate that as we go forward.
The next question is, can we get soffit posts on the York Boulevard Bridge? I believe that the question is asking for delineators, or what we sometimes call candlesticks, that we recently installed in the 2nd Street tunnel. We're not considering them at this time. We're not closed-minded, and we can look at them. Again, the issue is cost. They cost a lot more than bike lane.
Not just cost, but on the York Bridge, there's no buffer, and I don't think we're comfortable just putting it right on top of the white stripe yet.
Standard bicycles are getting taller as many cyclists transition to Dutch-style upright riding. These bikes do not fit into the Metro Station bike lockers. Will this be taken into consideration to provide more bike lockers at new stations?
So this is a question for Metro. We don't maintain or operate the bicycle lockers at Metro. You'll need to reach out to the bike program there and let him know about this.
Okay, bike lanes would be awesome on Westwood. Parking is so difficult there. Can we get bike lanes there? Again, that's something that we're going to be looking at. It's important to have people at the table to help us shape what the project will be. Are protected two-way bikeways on streets like Figueroa or Westwood coming to LA?
I again think this is referring to two-way cycle tracks. Again, when we put in bike lanes, it's a two-way facility. It's just a lane on each side of the roadway. But this is going to be driven by the public process and, again, funding.
Specifically on the My Figueroa project, we're doing one-way cycle tracks on each side of the roadway. And on Westwood, there's nothing planned at this point.
Why is it that Santa Monica Boulevard has a bike lane east of the 405 but not west of it?
Well, Santa Monica Boulevard east of the 405 is extremely wide. It was reconstructed as part of a huge project. And with that reconstruction, bike lanes were added. West of the 405, it would require losing that curb peak hour lane and maybe possibly more. So that would be a very difficult corridor. But it may be on the bike plan for future evaluation at some point in the future.
Okay, what is so expensive about painting lines on a street? Why can't we do test cycle tracks with movable planters and paint like New York City did rather than million-dollar versions?
This is a common question, and it's important to understand that a cycle track can be designed in a number of ways, and what we're trying to do is learn from the successes and mistakes that perhaps other jurisdictions have had with cycle tracks. Just moving the cycle track or the bike lane to the curb is not enough. In fact, visibility-wise, it could create a lot of problems. We want to do it in a way that is successful and safe, not only perceived safe, but actually safe. And to do that, we need to expend the funding to signalize and fully protect and accommodate buses and park vehicles.
So the next question is, are the Westwood Boulevard bike lanes south of Santa Monica still being considered? They are still in the bicycle plan, but they're not a part of this package.
We also we seem to have no further questions in the queue at this time. I can leave is open for a minute or so, but if there isn't any further questions, we are almost at the time of closing. And before we do, here's the question. Okay. Are you studying the impacts on vehicle traffic on Westwood Boulevard as you look at implementing bicycle lanes? Yes, that will be a key metric that we're going to be looking at with any project that we're going to be evaluating or any study corridor. So we're going to be looking at traffic. We're also going to be looking at safety, connectivity, and a host of other metrics. And does a bike plan anticipate upgrades or repaving for existing facilities? The Bologna Creek bike path, for example, could be extended and or made safer with lights.
That's actually a great idea, and it's something I've been thinking about and on some of our bike paths, adding lights on those sections that don't have it. But it's another one of those situations where it requires funding, and we'll be looking at opportunities in the future to do upgrades. In fact, we've done one recently on Browns Creek bike path in the San Fernando Valley.
And about buffered bicycle lanes on Balboa between Burbank and Ventura Boulevard? That's not currently in the next phase of implementation. Okay. I may have missed it, but Broadway Boulevard from downtown through Lincoln Heights, is that something considered? That's not part of the next implementation phase as of yet. And then the next question, how much money does the city spend on bikeways every year? How can we get more?
So we get small amounts of local money. I'm sorry, I'm struggling with the wires here. We get small amounts of local money. Some Measure R, we get a small percentage of Measure R, 5% of the local allocation of Measure R, we get 5%, and we get some Transportation Development Act, and we heavily pursue grant opportunities as they are available. We need our elected officials to support more funding for bicycling and walking projects throughout the state and throughout the through our federal legislatures.
Okay, so what's the purpose of roundtables if metrics won't be available at the roundtable? And the purpose of the first roundtable is to establish goals and objectives and really have that conversation of what we want the, that corridor to achieve to. The metrics will be evolved from that discussion, and we'll be able to come back to the next roundtable with some of the response. And so this is the last question we're going to have for this evening. Is the city considering asymmetric Cheryl Lane projects on hilly streets, including in San Pedro?
The answer is yes. Those are on the table, and we will be looking at those on some of our streets. In fact, we may be looking at it on a couple of the streets in this package, so it's definitely something we consider.
Okay, so with that, we're going to have to conclude the webinar for this evening. I just want to extend all of our thanks to you for taking the time out, an hour out of this evening to listen to us, to hear about what bicycle planning is going on in Los Angeles. And we look forward to your further participation and engage with us as we plan ahead and create a more bike-friendly, complete street city. Thank you. Good night.
And as everybody is hopping off the line, I just want to let you know that right at 8 o'clock, we will be posting the slides from tonight's presentation. The entire presentation, including the video and the audio version, will be posted later this evening once I recover all the bandwidth. Again, thank you so much for the time tonight, and we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Take care.